a recent announcement by CMS is that they're going to change the way they reimburse physicians, hospitals, and ancillary services, meaning, the diagnostic services, laboratories, x-rays, all that stuff. And the
Right.
way they're implementing that is by first using their pilot program that they've established, I don't know, about 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
called the Accountable Care Organizations, where there's a group of providers, including all those that I mentioned, that kind of work together and they get reimbursed as a collective, which is, you know, that is just the beauty of the progressive,
Oh,
the
exactly.
pay them
But
all together so they can share. But what happens is the CMS, which is Medicare and Medicaid, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, they then mandate certain quality measures that these providers have to meet. And if they don't meet these quality measures, then they don't get their full payment. So if they get paid a lump sum at the beginning of the year for treating this population, this kind of
right.
pool of patients, Medicare keeps 30% of their pay. And if they meet the standards, then they get it at the end of the year. But if they don't get paid. And so what has happened since they started the pilot program, there were originally 32 accountable care organizations. About 12, 15 of them dropped out because they were not meeting the standards. Why are they not meeting the standards? Because they're set by bureaucrats and not by people that are in the industry, not by physicians or anybody that knows what's going on in the front line. So this kind of what CMS announces. This is their goal. This is how they want to pay everybody, not just their pilot programs, but everybody. So that leads us to kind of the subject that I really wanted to talk about, which is the latest scandal, if you want to call it that, whose source was Jonathan Gruber, that awesome MIT professor that is
Right. Right.
just a little too honest. And so he came out with a paper back in 2010. And in 2010, April of 2010, that was 1 month after Obamacare was signed into law. And if you remember, this guy helped write the law. Well,
Right.
in his paper, he's talking about how ultimately the government should tax fat people. And how does this tie into the whole thing? Well, one of those quality measures that I was talking to you about that
Mm-hmm.
doctors would
Right.
be judged upon would be the body mass index of their patients. So the government has been collecting all this data through what they call, some incentive programs through Medicare, where the
Yeah.
doctors were reporting to the government originally, and this is how sleazy these Democrats are. Originally, they just wanted to know if you were actually measuring the body mass index of your patients. And for those that don't know what that is, they take into account your height and your weight, and then decide whether you're obese or not. And it's not an accurate measure because there are some people that are, that have a heavier muscle mass, may not necessarily have a lot of fat content, but let's just imagine like a short bodybuilder who's not obese, but he's going to score poorly. So now you're tying together what Gruber said about taxing the fat people, and you see that these plans have been building for many years. This is not new to Obamacare, because those reporting measures started about 10 years ago, and we had Republican administrations that were in agreement with these schemes with the excuse that this is just, this is what's good for the patient, because it's always what's good for you.
Well, they can always, they can always package stuff like that. This is just another example, and I've kind of used this, I don't know, measuring stick or analogy or whatever, but it's almost like something off an SNL Weekend Update. Can you imagine back in the Seth Meyers days when he was doing it? I thought he did a good job. But coming out, during when Gruber being lambasted for all these videos that surfaced, and then Seth Meyers comes out with, and there's more, and making it up at the time. Now Gruber wants to tax fat people. That would have been hilarious, but it's true.
It's true. And not only that, one of the things that people need to consider is that that's not the only measure that they're keeping track of. They're also keeping information about for example, for diabetic patients, there's a lab called the hemoglobin A1C, and if any of the listeners are diabetics, they are very familiar with that. That is a lab that is done to kind of keep an eyeball on whether the patient is really sticking to their diet and really taking their medication. And
right.
If there's a certain level higher, a number past 9 as a lab result, that means the patient's really not following orders,
right.
Or perhaps the medication is not adjusted correctly. But the point is, they are very interested. The government is very interested in having patients' hemoglobin A1C. Okay. And if you put that together with body mass index results, now you see where they're going. It's not just fat people; it's diabetic people.
Okay, so
now, who else? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, finish, and I want to expand this a bit.
Yeah, the other thing that is happening right now is the pharmacies, the large big pharmacies like CVS and Rite Aids of the world. They are collecting also information if you don't refill your medications on time. So if you have your diabetic medications and you don't go pick it up exactly a month after your last refill, they are collecting and reporting that information to the government. So you have you have the partners in crime, the government and the large corporations that are trying to have, a benefit out of Obamacare and their schemes. And they're all kind of reporting on you, and you don't have a say.
Setting aside the fact that even a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, 10 for certain, setting aside the fact that if 10 years ago someone suggested that, at someday, your local pharmacy will be reporting to the federal government if you don't pick up your prescription on time, people would have thought that was like, George Orwell's 1984. But setting that aside, so you've given a few good examples, the fat tax, the test, diabetics, the pharmacy thing. How does this all play into what I believe, Patty, and you can weigh in on that as well, is the ultimate goal here of liberals? It's going to take a while, but is single pay, and by that we mean true government. We don't have government health insurance, Obamacare, but true government provided health care benefits. How does this all play into that, or do you think it does?
Oh, absolutely it does, because you got to remember that the government provided health care that we already have in the form of Medicaid and Medicare
and veterans benefits. True, yeah.
They are broke, and if you really think these people are evil, and at least Gruber is, because he has in fact said that you're going to have to, at some point, ration care Well, it's a very progressive idea that if you are not, you are not carrying your own weight, meaning you're not behaving the way they want you to behave, then you're the one whose services are going to be cut. And that should scare people. But it's not just the liberal progressives. It's also the so-called Republican progressives, because most people don't know that all of this, the push for physicians to get electronic health records, with the excuse said as a mean of adopting technology, blah, 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 that push came from none other than Newt Gingrich. When he had his Center for Health Transformation, he was going around the country trying to convince the people, providers, physicians, and others in the industry that it would be a good idea to centralize medical records. And this is a big time progressive way of probably, knowing they're broke, a way to control the expenses and at the same time control your behavior.
I think, and the control issue, ultimately the expense issue feeds into to control behavior. I mean, as it exists today, Obamacare is, I think, without question, ultimately will prove to be the largest wealth redistribution scheme in the history of the universe. Now, having said that, if this country ultimately ends up with single payer, i.e. true health care, government health care across the board. And so listeners understand there's basically two kinds of systems. That in Canada, in which the government is the single payer, hence that's where that term comes from, but it contracts, it pays doctors, facilities for the care. All the way to the system in England, Great Britain, which everybody works for the government. Is that all ultimately about, again to your word, is that all ultimately about control of behavior in people?
I'm not exactly sure. I think that's a big portion of it. The big difference in America is that they're not taking into account that physicians are first American before they're physicians, and that they're not going to put up with this baloney. I mean, they're not going to just bend over and do whatever the government says. And we've seen that with colleagues, so many of them planning their retirement, because by 2018, when all of these, the full blunt force of Obamacare is completely implemented, if we don't get a Republican president in 2016, these physicians are planning to leave the practice.
And they're listen, we're out of time.
Other ones.
Patty, I can't believe it. We're out of time, but you're exactly right. And how many have we had leave already? Patty Newman, thanks for being on, and we got to have you back, okay?
All righty.
I'm sorry I had to cut you off. I'm watching the clock. Hard break.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, man. Okay, so Patty Newman, she knows a lot about her and her husband, very successful medical practice facility. Jessica, I don't know. It's been a fun show, but I get riled up about Obamacare. We got riled up about a lot of stuff today, didn't we?
Oh, totally. And a lot of it had to do with medical stuff.
It really did. And a lot of it had to do with the Brian Williams thing, man. And again, I just find it fascinating because this is just so much of a bigger story as it relates to a lot of stuff. So,
oh yeah, it's gonna get bigger too.
Yeah, it's gonna get bigger. We said it last week, and we can say it again. So, all I want to do is wish you a happy time tonight. We're out of time. Have a happy birthday dinner. This is The Right Mics, Mike Miller, Michael Hausum. We will be back tomorrow. I hope you are too. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced by IJReview.com.